Ma'asechet Baba Mesia Daf Pehe. We're in the middle of some fascinating agadot, and we just saw the story that when Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, died, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wanted to marry his widow, but she said no. Right? I was married to someone that was greater than you, both in Torah and in Ma'asim, and therefore this would be a downgrade for me to go and marry you. And so, in what way was he greater in actions? In that he was afflicted. He brought afflictions upon himself for so many years. In what way was he greater in Torah? So we saw the story that then when they were students, that Rabbi Elazar was able to run circles around Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, preempt his questions and give answers and say that his questions were meaningless in the first place. And Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was depressed. And then his father, Rabban Shimon ben Gamaliel, says, don't be depressed because Rabbi Elazar, he is a lion, the son of a lion. His father is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. But you are a lion. It's not about you, but rather it's me. I am only a fox. That's what Rabban Shimon ben Gamaliel said about himself, which is a very humble thing to say. So therefore we pick up on that. Hainu damar Rabbi Shelosha an vetanin hen velo hen Abba ubne betera v'Yonatan ben Shaul. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says that there are three models of modesty, and they are my father and the sons of Betera and Yonatan, the son of Shaul. Rabban Shimon Gamliel Hadamaran. The story about Rabban Shimon Gamliel is what we just said, that he was willing to admit that he is only a fox, he's not as great, and therefore his son could not reach the level of Torah of Rabbi Yoshua, of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Bnei Betera damar mor hoshibu barosh minu lenasi alehen. Bnei Betera is a story about Hillel. Bnei Betera, they were in charge in the Bet HaMikdash around the 1st century CE, and so they would make all the rulings and decisions. And one day a halachic question came, and they did not know the answer. And Hillel Hazaken, who came from Bavel, he was able to solve the problem. This is can you prepare the Korban Pesach on Shabbat? And they didn't know, and he knew. And so when he told them a tradition about that, they made him Rosh Yeshiva. So that's a great sign of humility, that they were willing to put this newcomer as a Rosh, as the head, over them. And they made him a Nasi. Even above themselves. And Yonatan ben Shaul dekamar le David, v'atatim locha Israel v'ani ehyeh lecha lemishneh. Yonatan was the son of the king, King Shaul, and so he could have been the next king. And yet he told David that you will be the next king, and I will be second to you. I will be subservient to you. So that was a great act of humility. When then we ask about that. Maybe Yonatan ben Shaul, maybe he wasn't doing it out of humility. He just saw that that's it, though. The world, everybody's going after David. He's going to win the next election. He's going to be the next king no matter what. So if you can't beat him, you may as well join them. So maybe it's not out of humility, but just out of being practical. And the sons of Betera, also they saw that Hillel really was greater than them. He was able to answer questions that they couldn't. So they had to appoint him the Nasi. So it wasn't necessarily out of humility. Look, in that case, even though sometimes you can recognize that someone else is greater, but still, you have to be humble enough to recognize that in the first place. So, all right, they had some humility, at least that they were willing to recognize that. But in any case, Hillel was simply greater, so they had to appoint him. El Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel vadai an vetan hava, but Rashbag, he wasn't doing this for any personal gain or glory or any practical reason. He didn't have to make his son feel better by telling his son, oh, you know why you're not as great? Because of me. Right? He didn't have to say that. and yet he did, and that shows how humble he was. Amar Rabbi, Chavivin Yisurin, Kibel alet lesad shene shit besmirta, ushba bisfarna, Amrila shib'a bismirta, veshit bisfarna. So Rabbi, now he learned from his from the previous incident that the widow would not marry him because Rabbi Elazar was greater in deeds, meaning because he was greater in suffering. So Rabbi says, oh, I see, suffering is a great thing. It can bring someone to teshuvah. It could bring someone to higher levels of spirituality. Generally, asceticism and self-flagellation and self-affliction is not as dominant in Judaism as it is in some other cultures, but there is some of it, and this is one story that does show the positive value of affliction, self-affliction. So he accepted upon himself for 13 years that he should have suffering and affliction, and he split it up. It was 6 years that he had kidney stones, very painful, and 7 years of scurvy. And others say the other way around, it was 7 years of kidney stones and 1 year of scurvy. You might say, well, what's the difference? It's only 1 year. Yeah, 1 year of kidney stones is a horrible, horrible pain. So now to demonstrate how big his pain was, we tell a tangent story. Ahuriyare deber hava atir mishavor malka. The stableman of the house of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was wealthier than King Shapur. King Shapur was the king of Persia, so he was one of the richest people in the whole world, and yet Rabbi's stableman was richer than him. That just shows how many horses and cattle that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi had. This is a exaggeration, but the point of the exaggeration is that he had a lot of animals, and the stableman just got wealthy himself from taking care of the animals. So when the stableman would put fodder before the livestock, there were so many that the noise of them eating would travel a distance of 3 mil. And so the stableman, he would make sure to feed the livestock at the same time that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi went to the bathroom, because it was so painful for Rabbi. He would be screaming, and in order to counter those screams so that people shouldn't have to hear it, and Rabbi would be embarrassed by that, so Rabbi and the stableman coordinated that all these animals would be braying at the same time to drown out the sound of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's screaming out of pain. But even so, still Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's voice screaming was so loud, it overcame the sound of the livestock, and even sailors out at sea were able to hear it. Okay, so there's a description of how great was Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's afflictions that he brought upon himself, because he was a competition who could suffer more. But even so, still the suffering of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, was greater in its significance and impact than that of Rabbi. Because those of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, they came out of love. They came, and out of love, they left. He brought them upon himself out of love. Remember, he was a sheriff. He was arresting criminals, and he was unsure. Maybe I made a mistake. Look with the laundryman. He really didn't make mistakes, but just in case. So he brought upon himself these afflictions just out of love to make himself more humble and self-abased and so on. So these were totally out of love, and then that's it. When he was done, they left. But Rabbi, they came because of a certain circumstance. He did not bring them upon himself, although previously he said he saw that and then he wanted affliction. But he also deserved these afflictions because of a sin that he made. And then they left him because of a positive story about him. What was the negative story that caused these afflictions that caused him to deserve these afflictions? One time there was a little calf that was going to its slaughter, and this little calf came and hung its head on the corner of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's garment and was crying. The poor calf was afraid that it's going to be killed. Amar le'ezil, lechachno sarata. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said, go be killed. That's what you were created for. You were created to be our steak dinner tonight, right? Get out of here. Amri ho'il v'la kamerachem le'etu alei yisurin. So, up in heaven they said, look how he doesn't have compassion over this little calf, so he deserves afflictions. All right, this story is always quoted on source sheets about Sa'ar Balei Chaim and animal rights and things like that. The point is not that you can't kill the animal, you can kill it, you're allowed to eat meat, but to have some compassion and do it in a kind way. Don't let it see the animal right in front of it being killed and it knows it's going to be the next one. In slaughterhouses today, they don't let the animal see what's going to happen next. So have some compassion. Okay. Valyedeh ma'aseh halchu. Yom echad havaka kansha amete derbi beta. Hava shadya bene karkushta veka kanshu lehu. Amar la shibkin hu ketib merachamav al kol ma'asav. Amru ho'il merachem nerachem ale. What was the story that happened that made the afflictions go away? The positive story. One day, the maidservant at Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was sweeping in the house, and she was sweeping out these little weasels or little mice and throwing them out of the house. And Rabbi Yehuda Nasi told the maidservant, you know what, leave them. They're comfortable in the house. They have food. They have warmth. He had compassion over these little mice. And he quoted the pasuk, Hashem's mercy is on all of his works. All of his works, not only humans, even little weasels are deserving of Hashem's mercy. So, you know what? They're not bothering me. Let them stay in the house. And so, up in heaven, they said, oh, look how he's compassionate. Look how he's compassionate even over these little animals. So, therefore, let us be merciful over him. And thereby, the afflictions stopped. And now, this is the power of afflictions. All the years that Rabbi Elazar was afflicted, nobody died before their time. His afflictions were able to atone for the sins of the generation, and everybody died of nice old age. As long as Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was fasting, the world did not require rain. Everything, just dew came down subtly, softly in the morning, and didn't have to deal with nuisance and flooding that rain brings, and everything still got watered. Rav Shela, Kashe Yomad Mitra Ki Yomad Dina. After all, Rabbah, the son of Rav Shela, said that a day of rain is as harsh to the world like a judgment day. Things get flooded, things get ruined, and so better to have nice soft dew, which is what happened. V'amar amemar, ilav sarich la'alma ba'u merabanan rachamei aleh u'bateli leh. And Amemar says, if not that the world needs rain for everything to grow, the rabbis would have prayed for it to stop, because it's such a nuisance. But during the time that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was fasting, even though it wasn't raining, just the water was so saturated with moisture that even when you uprooted a radish from the field, still the hole was full of water. That's how it was just miraculously watered without the nuisance of rain. Ikla Rabbi la'atred Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Amar lehem yesh lo ben lo'to sadik. After Rabbi Elazar died, we saw that story. So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi went to the place one day where Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, had lived, and he asked them, Did the great tzaddik Rabbi Elazar have a son? Amru lo, yesh lo ben, v'chol zona sheniskeret b'shnayim, socharto b'shmona. Yes, he has a son, but he is not following the ways of Torah. In fact, he's being very promiscuous, and every zona who can hire herself out for 2 coins, meaning this, the high level zonot, they would pay him eight coins just to be with them. That's how handsome he was. So he was handsome, but not in the way of Torah. Atyeh asmiche b'Rabbi ve'ashlameh Rabbi Shimon ben Isi ben Lakonya achot imeh. So Rabbi did some kiruv work, and so he brought this boy, and he gave him semicha. And he had him go and study with Rabbi Shimon ben Isi ben Lakonya, the boy's mother's brother. So, interestingly, seems like he gave him semicha first, and then he sent him to learn. Maybe that was on purpose to say, listen, you have great potential. You know your father was, and your grandfather was. Okay, out of here. I'm going to give you a title, just to change his identity. And once he had that, he's no longer this debased young man. But now, okay, listen, you have potential to be a rabbi. I'm going to call you rabbi, and now go learn. Then v'nishma, make him rabbi, and then make him learn to bring him to teshuvah. Kol yoma hava amar likriyati ana ezil. So this boy, it didn't really work right away. Every day he would say, I want to go back to my town. I want to go back to my old ways. It's too hard to have to study Torah. Amar le chakim abadu yatach v'gulta dedahaba parsu alach v'rebi karulach v'at amart likriyati ana ezil. And so his teacher and uncle, Rabbi Shimon ben Isi, would say, we called you wise. We put a golden cloak over you. That's part of the procedure to do semicha. You go by the title rabbi, and you want to go back to your town to be what? To be just a low-life nobody in your town? Look at all this wonderful benefit that you're getting here. You're learning Torah. You're becoming a great spiritual level. Look at all this honor. Amar le mumi azubada. And the boy thought about it, and he said, you're right, I make a vow. I'm abandoning my previous thoughts of going back to my previous ways and back to my town. I am going to commit myself to study Torah. So you see that it worked. If Rabbi Yehuda Nasi knew what he was doing, that first you have to give him a position, give him honor, show him the greatness that he can aspire to, and then he will grow into that position. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had the willpower to stay. Ki gadal ata yatib bemetibta de Rabbi. So then, after he studied with his uncle Rabbi Shimon ben Isi for a while, then he graduated and he came and studied in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Shema'e lekale amar hakala dameh lekale de Rabbi Elazar be Rabbi Shimon amrule berehu. So one day in the shiur, this boy, he said something in class, and Rabbi said, that voice, I know that voice. It sounds just like Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon. And they said, yes, that in fact is his son. So Rabbi, hadn't kept track of him the whole time. He set him up for success, and eventually he was so successful he could be a student in Rabbi's own yeshiva. And so it came full circle, a beautiful story. Kari ale, upri sadik es chaim beloker nefashot chacham. Peri sadik es chaim ze Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Veloker nefashot chacham ze Rabbi Shimon ben Isi ben Lakonya. And Rabbi Yehuda Nasi quoted about him the pasuk, the fruit of the righteous is a tree of life, and he that was wise wins souls. So what does that mean? That the fruit of the righteous is a tree of life? This refers to this threefold generational inheritance of Torah. That's Rabbi Yosef, that was this boy's name, the son of Rabbi Elazar, who was the son of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. And the rest of the pasuk, someone that wins souls is wise. Who is it that wins souls? That is Rabbi Yosef's uncle and teacher, Rabbi Shimon ben Isi ben Lakonya, who was able to bring back the soul of Rabbi Yosef, and he did this in a wise way. And so, it doesn't necessarily happen automatically. You have to intervene, and you have to have a good mentor and a good teacher to bring someone back to the right way. Eventually, when Rabbi Yosef died, they brought him to the family cave for burial. And just like when Rabbi Elazar died, there was the snake that was protecting it, the snake with its tail in its mouth, and wouldn't let them in. Same phrase that they said when Rabbi Elazar died. Now Rabbi Yosef died, his son. He said, snake, oh snake, open your mouth so that a son can come and be buried next to his father. But the snake refused. So the people said, why isn't it opening? It must be that the father, Rabbi Elazar, is greater in Torah than Rabbi Yosef, and Rabbi Yosef therefore is not worthy to be buried next to his father. But the Bat Kol came and clarified it. It's not because Rabbi Elazar was greater in Torah than Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef was also great, but rather because Rabbi Yosef did not suffer in the cave, whereas Rabbi Elazar did. This is the story of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai when he said something negative about the Roman government and he had to run away and he hid in the cave for 13 years. His son, Rabbi Elazar, was with him and studied Torah with him during those 13 years, and that's one of the ways that they became so great in Torah, and it was also suffering during that time. So that takes them on a higher level. That Rabbi Yosef, although he is great in Torah, but he did not suffer in that way, and therefore did not deserve to be buried next to his father. Ikla Rabbi La'atred Rabbi Tarfon. Now Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he did this often. He checked after children of righteous people. So he went to the place where Rabbi Tarfon lived. Rabbi Tarfon was a couple of generations already before him. Amar le, yesh lo ben lo to sadik shaya mekapeach et banav. So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi asks, did Rabbi Tarfon, that great tzaddik, have a child? Because after all, Rabbi Tarfon would sometimes make an oath by his children's life. If he was doing something, as if I'm right, I swear by the lives of my children that this is correct. So even if he was correct all the time, still, just by saying that, not good luck. Amru lo ben en lo, and they said, no, he never had a son. However, he did have a daughter, ben bat yesh lo, and he has a grandson from that daughter. V'chol zona sheniskeret b'shnayim, socharto bishmona. And again, he was so handsome that every prostitute who would be hired for 2 coins, meaning the top prostitutes, they would hire him for 8. To be with him. So that's how handsome he was, but also way off the derech. Atyuhu lekameh. So the townspeople, they brought this grandson of Rabbi Tarfon to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Amar le'i hadart bach yahibna lach beratai. Says, listen, if you make teshubah, I will give you my own daughter, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's daughter, to marry. Hadar be. It's okay, deal. And he made teshubah. Now they didn't end up married. So there's 2 versions. Either they did marry, but it didn't work out, and they divorced. Others say they never got married in the first place because they didn't want it to be Rabbi Tarfon's grandson, especially did not want it to be said that he made teshuvah because of her. That was an ulterior motive. He made teshuvah, he wanted it to be just for that motive, for no other reason. Now, why did Rabbi Yehuda Nasi make it his business to go and check after the children of Sadiqim and to take care of them? Tamar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, V'amri la Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan, V'amri la Amar Rabbi Shemuel bar Nachmani Amar Rabbi Yonatan. Okay, 3 different traditions of who said this first. כל המלמדת בין חברו תורה זוכה ויושב בישיבה של מעלה שנאמר אם תשוב ואשיבך לפני תעמוד. So because they taught, probably this was a popular statement that many of them taught, anyone who teaches his friend's son Torah will merit and be able to sit in the yeshiva up in heaven in the world to come. All right, it's a great thing, not only, of course, to teach your own kids, but to teach other people's kids. To be a teacher for others is a great thing. And we know this from the pasuk in Yirmiyah. If you return, meaning if you bring back students to Torah, then Hashem says, I will bring you back and you can stand before me. Stand before me means in the yeshiva in heaven. So this is midah keneged midah. If you bring other people back to Torah, Hashem will bring you closer to Torah. V'chol hamelamedet ben am haaretz Torah, afilu HaKadosh Baruch Hu gozer gezeram batela b'shvilo shene'emar im ve'im tosi yakar mizolel kefi tihiyeh. And anyone who teaches an am haaretz Torah, That's also great. And it's so great that even HaKadosh Baruch Hu will, if there was a harsh decree against a person, he will cancel it. And we know this also from that pasuk that continues and says, and if you bring forth something precious from something worthless is from an Amaretz, and you go and take care of their son and teach them Torah and make the son of an Amaretz a great person, then Kifi, like my mouth, you will be, meaning that your will be my mouth, and my mouth will cancel that decree. Amar Rabbi Parnach, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kol shub tamid chacham, benot tamid chacham, benen benot tamid chacham, shub en Torah poseket mizaro leolam, shene'emar, vani zot beriti, vegomer v'lo yamushu, mepicha, o mepi zaracha, o mepi zera zaracha, Amar Hashem, me'ata ve'ad olam. Anyone who is a tamid chacham, and his son is also a tamid chacham, and his grandson also is a Torah scholar, then you can be guaranteed that the Torah will not stop from their descendants forever. How do you know? From the pasuk in Yeshaya, right? And this is my berit, Hashem's guarantee that the Torah will not cease from your mouth and your son and your grandson, me'ata v'ad olam, then it will continue forever. My Amar Hashem. Now, why does it say Amar Hashem here? Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ani areb lecha bedabar zeh. I will be a guarantor, right? I mean, already the fourth generation, the great-grandfather, may not be around to see it and make sure it happens. So Hashem says, I'll be around, I'm eternal, and I will guarantee that will be true. My me'ata v'ad olam, Amar Yirmiyah, mikan ve'elach, Torah mechazeret al achsanya shela. And what does that mean? From now and forever? So the Yirmiyah explains, once you take the effort to make sure that your children and your grandchildren are studying Torah well, then that's it. Torah will go to its natural lodging, right? Just like a person. Sometimes you go on a vacation, you go here, there, but you always come back home. So once you have 3 generations of Torah learning, that's it. That's the Torah's home. It feels comfortable there. You're a host of Torah. So the Torah will always remain with that host family. Rav Yosef Yeteb Arba'in Ta'anita. V'akrihu lo yamushu mi picha. Yeteb Arba'in Ta'anita charine. V'akrihu lo yamushu picha pi zaracha. יתה מעט העניתה אחרין יתה ויקריוהו לא ימוש מפיך ומפי זרעך ומפי זרע זרעך. אמר מכאן ואילך לה צריך נא התורה מחזרת על האכסניה שלה. Rav Yosef, he fasted for 40 days so that he would be able to gain the knowledge of Torah. So they said, oh, okay, you're successful, you really care about Torah that much, and you, again, the power of affliction, self-affliction, so, okay, you're guaranteed, you got Torah in your mouth. So he fasted another 40 days, so that another 40 days, and then they read to him in a dream. Akrihu means he had a dream, and in the dream he was read to this pasuk. First, only the first 3 words, and in the second dream, after another 40 days of fasting, that Torah will not leave your mouth or the mouth of your descendants, of your children. And then he fasted another 100 fasts. And then he was read to in a dream, the rest of the pasuk, that Torah will not leave not only your children, but even your grandchildren. And so after he did that, he fasted 40, 40, and 100. So he says, now I don't have to fast anymore, because Torah will always come back to its home. And this is a family of 3 generations. Then that's it. I am guaranteed that it will continue after that. Question, how come it's 40, 40, and then the last one is 100? Shouldn't it be another 40? That's a good question. And so if you look in the manuscripts here, it says, Me'at ta'anita acharine. So in all the printed editions, it does have 100. In some of the manuscripts, in fact, has 40 for this. Here you see Arba'in. This one skipped the whole thing altogether, probably just because it ends similarly, so it skipped it by mistake. But here has 100, this one has 40, and so that does have some and some. What could possibly have happened is had just the letter mem, and mem meaning to mean 40, and then it was expanded by mistake to me'ah. Although we don't have currently any manuscripts that have mem only, we do have a mem aleph, but mem aleph clearly is short for me'ah, so it's not clear how this discrepancy happened, but it could have happened in that way, even though we don't have any older manuscripts that might show that discrepancy. Okay, in any case, he was able to fast in order to gain a guarantee of future Torah. Now, more about people fasting regarding Torah. Rabbi Zeraki Selik La'ad Yisrael Yatib Me'a Ta'anita Delish Takach Gemara Babla'a Mine Kihechi Dela Nitardeh. Rabbi Zera originally was from Bavel. And then he made Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, where he's known as Rabbi Ze'era, and he fasted 100 days of fasting to learn Torah, but to forget all the Torah that he studied in Bavel, so that it would not confuse him in learning the Torah of Eretz Yisrael. The two were different styles. In Eretz Yisrael, the emphasis was more on memorizing traditions and knowing how to apply them practically. In Bavel, there was much more analytical argumentation, coming up with new ideas and new arguments, and disputation was the more prized thing. If you just knew things by heart, in Bavel, no, it was the power of reason and argumentation that was prized the most. And so it's not that it's two different Torahs, but it's two different styles of learning. And so he wanted to forget all those old ways, everything he had learned before, so that he could be fresh and clean to learn the Torah of Eretz Yisrael. It's amazing that this is recorded in the Talmud Bavli. Anyway, Yeteb me'acharinita de la lishkub Rabbi Elazar bishne v'naflin ilave mili de sibura. He fasted another 100 fasts so that Rabbi Elazar should not die early in his own time, in Rabbi Zera's time, because Rabbi Elazar was in charge of communal affairs, took a lot of time, and if Rabbi Elazar would have died, then Rabbi Zera would be the next in charge, and he'd have to take care of all these political things and communal matters that would take away his time from learning Torah. So he says, I hope that Rabbi Elazar remains living all of my life. Now, Rabbi Elazar says here that Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, which cannot be. Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, was a Tana. He was a fourth generation Tana. Rabbi Zera is a third generation Babylonian Amorah. So way after. So that doesn't make any sense. And in fact, if we look at the manuscripts on this point, although Rabbi Elazar is in the printed editions, the best manuscripts have Rabbi Ilah. Eli or Ilah, same thing. Eli. And here you can see that in some of them it's abbreviated. So this is now we know for sure what happened here. It originally was Eli, which was abbreviated to Aleph Lamed Ayin, and then the abbreviation was expanded mistakenly to Rabbi Elazar. Elazar is a more common, but in fact it's Ilah is the rabbi he was talking about, who was in charge of communal affairs. And so Rabbi Zera fasted 100 days, that Rabbi Ilah, I should say, should remain in charge. And then he fasted another 100 fasts so that the fires of Gehinam should not affect him. Perhaps the 100 over here was influenced by the hundreds over here. That's why it says 40, 40, 100, but the last 100 might have been a transition to this story where they're all hundreds. Kol telatin yomeh haba badik nafshe. Rabbi Zera, he wanted to examine his level of righteousness every 30 days. Shegar tanura salik v'yateh begaveh. So he lit an oven and he climbed inside. V'la hava shalta benura. And the fire did not affect him. He didn't go on fire. He didn't feel the heat because he was on such a high level that his righteousness protected him. They had these big ovens that you could, like a communal oven. Yomachad yahavu be'erabanan aina v'i charchu shakeh ve'karule katin charich shakeh. One day the rabbis gave him the eye. They said, they looked at him with jealousy and also negatively. What are you doing? You're so self-righteous. You think so highly of yourself that you're going to test yourself and put yourself in an oven. They didn't like this, and because of that, in fact, his legs became singed in the fire, and from then on, he got a nickname of the short one with singed legs. I guess he was also short. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, מה דכתיב? מי האיש החכם ויבן את זאת, ואשר דיבר את פי השם אליו ויגידה, על מה אבדה הארץ. So Rav said, what does this pasuk mean? Who is the person that's so wise that can understand this? And who is a person that Hashem speaks to them that can declare what the answer to the following question? Why was the land of Israel destroyed? So what does this mean? That the matter was asked to the Chachamim, that's Ha'ish Chacham, and they said, we don't know the answer. And they asked the Nevi'im, that's the people that Asher Diber Pi Hashem, they speak God's words, and they could not explain why was the land destroyed. עד שפירשו הקדוש ברוך הוא בעצמו שנאמר, ויאמר השם אל עוז בא מתורתי אשר נתתי לפניהם. אמר רב יהודה אמר רב, שלא ברכו בתורה תחילה. Hashem himself came and answered, this continuation of the pasuk is because they have abandoned the Torah that I put before them. And Rav explained, it's not that they totally abandoned the Torah, they were following Torah, they were learning Torah, but they did not recite the blessings of Birkot HaTorah earlier. Seems like a small thing, so what? So they missed Birkot HaTorah. But the point is that they were not learning Torah lishma, they were learning it not because it's holy, not because it's God's word that they wanted to know, so that they can do it. They were doing it for external reasons, so that they can be called rabbis, so that they can gain honor and power for self-serving reasons, and not Torah lishma. And so therefore, the land was destroyed. Amar Rav Chama, Mai dichtib, beleb nabon tanuach chochma, kereb kesilim tivada. Now, asking about other pesukim. What does this one mean? In the heart of him that has discernment, wisdom rests. But in the inward part of fools, it makes itself known. So, beleb nabon tanuach chochma, in the heart of someone who's discerning, there will be wisdom. Zet tamid chacham ben tamid chacham. So in the heart of wisdom, meaning that's a tamid chacham who has a son. So it's likely. Doesn't always happen, unfortunately, but it's likely, and it's a happy thing when you find wisdom grows out of a house where there is Torah learning. Then you have a kid who is also and what does it mean? That in the midst of foolish people, there is knowledge. Well, that's talking about the house of Ha'aretz. It's foolishness, but all of a sudden, a Talmid Chacham can sometimes grow, come from a family that is Am Ha'aretz. Amaru ula hainu damere inashe astera belagina kish kish karya. And Ula quoted the folk saying that when there's a coin in an empty barrel, it makes a big sound, kish kish. Whereas if you have a full barrel, if you have a barrel full of coins, you shake it, doesn't make so much noise because it's so full. But an empty one, it makes a lot of noise. And that's the same thing. When a Talmid Chacham comes from a family of Talmid Chachamim, it's kind of expected. So yeah, of course he's Talmid Chacham. Look who his father and the grandfather was. But when you have a family of Am Ha'aretz, and all of a sudden, as one of the children knows a lot, and so everybody's so impressed as, wow, look how much he knows, right? Where did this come from? And so that has a big impact. Amar le Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Zera, Mai dichtib katan vegadol sham hu ve'aibet chofshi me'adonav. Another pasuk that we want to understand from Eob. What does it mean that the small and great, humble and great, are together there? Meaning they both go down to their death. Eob is being cynical and says, what's the difference if you're great or humble? Everybody goes down to death, and there a servant is free from his master, because the master and the servant, while in this world one is dominant over the other, in the next world, everybody's the same. Now, what's the chidush here? Don't we know that everybody dies, whether they're small or great? אלא כל המקטין עצמו על דברי תורה בעולם הזה, נעשה גדול לעולם הבא. וכל משים עצמו כעבד על דברי תורה בעולם הזה, נעשה חופשי לעולם הבא. Rather, it teaches that it's not two different people, a small and a great person, but rather someone who makes himself small and humble in this world by learning Torah, he will be great in the next world. And anyone who makes himself like a slave in this world and is a servant of Torah, he will become free in the next world. That's the chidush of this pasuk. It's amazing how this midrash takes one of the most cynical pasukim in Iyov and turns it on its head and shows this is the very purpose of life. Resh Lakish was going around marking the burial caves of the sages. It's always good to mark burial caves, first of all, so that Kohanim, and anyone who wants to be tahor will know this is a tameh place, and so don't walk nearby it. But also, he's marking the graves to give them honor, that this is where this great tzaddik was buried. So he came to the burial cave. Again, in olden days, they weren't simply buried in the ground like now, but rather inside caves, and there were family tombs. So he came to the cave of Rabbi Chia, but then he couldn't find it. He always knew where it was. He would go there every so often for whatever reason, but now he couldn't find it. Chalash da'ateh, he got depressed. Amar ribono shel olam, says, why am I being denied the access to this cave? Did I not study Torah, analyze it in depth like he did? Yasta bat kol amra lo, Torah kemoto pilpalta. Torah kemoto lo ribatzta. And the bat kol came and said, you did learn and analyze Torah like him on his level. However, you did not spread Torah at the same level of Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia is known for composing collections of baraitot, like the Tosefta is ascribed to him. And so he would remember and organize and teach lots of traditions, and so while you're both great in learning, he was greater in teaching, and therefore Resh Lakish was denied knowledge of where he was. Kiavu minsu Rabbi Chanina v'Rabbi Chia. Amar le Rabbi Chanina l'Rabbi Chia. Ba'adeh didi kaminset Has v'chalila im ishtakachna Torah Yisrael mehadar nala mepilpuli. So, whenever Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Chia, they were chevrutot, and when they would argue with each other, Rabbi Chanina would tell Rabbi Chia, are you arguing with me? Don't you know who I am? If, heaven forbid, Torah would be lost from all of Israel and nobody knew anything, I would be able to reconstruct it from my own pilpul, my powers of analysis. I could single-handedly reconstruct, redo everything. So you're arguing with me? Amar le Rabbi Chia Rabbi Chanina. Ba'adeh didi come and see it. Ta'abdi la Torah. De'la tishtakach me'Yisrael. Rabbi Chia would say back to Rabbi Chanina, are you arguing with me? Don't you know what I do? I am actively making sure that Torah will not be lost, be forgotten by Israel. You're saying a hypothetical. If Torah will be forgotten, then I can reconstruct it. So I'm doing something better, Rabbi Chia says. I'm making sure that it won't be forgotten in the first place. Isn't that a greater thing? To preempt the forgetting of Torah rather than have to now reconstruct it after everybody forgot it. So what did Rabbi Chia do in order to make sure that Torah would not be forgotten? My abidna azlina deshadina kitana vegadlena nishbi vesayidna tabe umachilna bisrahu liatme ve'arichna migilta ve'uchtabna chamisha chumshe vesalikta lemata umekrina chamisha yanuke b'chamisha chumshe umatnina shita yanuke shita sidre v'amarna lehu ad harda Ve'atena akru hadadeh ve'atnu hadadeh ve'abdi la Torah dela tishtakach mi'Yisrael. Rabbi Chia says, I will take care of everything from A to Z. I would go and sow flax seeds, and then I would grow flax, and I would make out of them nets, and with the nets I would hunt deer. I would kill the deer, and I would take the meat and give it to orphans. So it's like the side benefits that he would do while he's on the way to doing his main goal. He also helped feed orphans. And then my main point of getting the animals was not only to feed the orphans, but for the hides. And I would take the hides and I would make parchment out of them. And I would write 5 chumashim, not a whole Sefer Torah, but 5 separate chumashim. and meaning it was not, even back then, they would have scrolls for everything, but when they're for study purposes, they write Bereshit separately and Shemot separately, easier to handle and to jump from the beginning to the end. And I would go to a city, and I would get 5 children, the bright children over there, and I would teach one kid Bereshit, one kid Shemot, 5 kids, each of the 5 Chumashim. I would get 6 other kids, and I would teach them Mishnah, that by heart. They have to learn by heart. So we got the most talented 11 kids in the city, and then after I taught them all that, I would say, listen, now I want you to teach each other. Each of you is in charge. 5 kids are experts in one chumash, and the other 6, each one's an expert in one seder of Mishnah. That way he could teach them quickly. And he says, now you teach each other everything that I taught you. And and he went from city to city doing this. He has the first schools, mandatory schools in every city. And so now you'd have a core group that would know Torah shebichtav, Torah sheba'al peh, and then they could go and then they would teach everybody else in the city. And through that, I am making sure that Torah will not be forgotten by the Jewish people. So I'm actively doing that. Rabbi Chia says, Rabbi Chanina is only if in the future it will be forgotten. No, I'm doing something better. היינו דאמר רבי, כמה גדולים מעשי חייה, אמר לרבי ישמעאל ברבי יוסי, אפילו ממור, אמר לאין, אפילו מאבא, אמר לחס וחלילה, לא תהא כזאת בישראל. And this is why Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said, how great are the works of Chiyah, right? Look what he did single-handedly. He made sure Torah would not be forgotten. Amar Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yoseh, afilu mimor. So Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yoseh, asked Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, are you saying that Rabbi Chiyah's actions are so great? Are they even greater than your actions? Amar le'in, yes they are. Rabbi Chiyah was younger than Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. He was like in between the Tanaim and Amoraim. And nevertheless, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who compiled the Mishnah, he says, even so, yes, Rabbi Chiyah is greater. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi also was humble. Afilu me'aba, amar lechas v'chalila lo teh kazot b'Yisrael. And Rabbi Yishmael, son of Rabbi Yoseh, says, is Chiyah even greater than my father, Rabbi Yoseh? And he says, no, chas v'shalom, that should not be said. Rabbi Yoseh, your father, was even greater. Amar Rabbi Zera, emesh nir'a li Rabbi Yoseh v'Rabbi Chanina. Amarti lo, esel mi ata takua, amar li esel Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Zera, who we saw before, he's the rabbi that made Aliyah. And he says, last night, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Chanina, came to me in a dream. And I asked him, what shi'ur did they place you in the yeshiva Shamala? Who do you study with? And he said, I study with Rabbi Yochanan. He's my teacher. Rabbi Yochanan etzel mi, etzel Rabbi Yanai. And Rabbi Yochanan himself, even though Rabbi Yochanan's a teacher, he's also a student. Every teacher has himself a teacher. So Rabbi Yochanan, he studies with Rabbi Yanai. But Rabbi Yanai etzel mi, etzel Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Yanai studies with Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Chanina etzel mi, etzel Rabbi Chiyah. Rabbi Chanina studies with Rabbi Chiyah. Showing again the greatness of Rabbi Chiyah as we just discussed. Amarti lo, Rabbi Yochanan esa Rabbi Chiyah la. So how come Rabbi Yochanan, can't go all the way up to the shiur of Rabbi Chiyah? Is he not worthy? Amarli batar de zikukin de nura be'orin de esha man me'ayel bar napacha letaman. And he says, what, are you kidding? No way. In a place of fiery sparks and burning fires, that's Rabbi Chiyah, is such a unbelievable level. Can the son of a smith go there? That's Rabbi Yochanan bar napacha. Referring to him. So no, even Rabbi Yochanan, who was really the greatest Amorah in all of Eretz Yisrael, is not worthy to be in the shiur of Rabbi Chiyah. Amar Rav Chaviva, Ishta'eh li Rav Chaviva bar Surmakeh. So Rav Chaviva says that a different Rav Chaviva, the son of Surmakeh, told me the following. Chazi le'ahu merabanan daba shechiach Eliyahu le'gabe de'lesafra havu shapiran eine ule'urta damyan ked miklin benura. He says, I saw a student who was always in conversation with Eliyahu. Eliyahu Nabi was would always visit the student. And I saw that this student, in the morning, his eyes were beautiful and healthy. but at night they looked like they were burnt with fire. Amar le, my hai. So I asked him, what happened to your eyes? Amar li, damri le Eliyahu. Achvil rabbanan ki salki lemitba diriki. So the student explained. He told me, when Eliyahu came to visit me, I asked him a request. I wanted him to show me the rabbis as they go up to the heavenly yeshiva. Right? They used to go up and study in the heavenly yeshiva, and then at the end of the session, when they were done, they would come back down to whatever abode that they were in. Amali bechuluhu masit istakule behu lebar megu harkad Rabbi Chiya delat istakel be. Eliyahu said, listen, you can look at the chariots of all of the sages, but not the chariot of Rabbi Chiya. So this is continuing the theme of the greatness of Rabbi Chiya. Do not look at that one. Maisi manaihu. So the student asked Eliyahu, what does it look like? What are the signs? How am I going to know that that's him? Bechuluhu azeh malache kisalki dvenachti. Lebar megu harkad Rabbi Chiya de mi nafshe salik dvenachi. This is, you'll see all of them, all of the other chariots, like palanquins, they're being carried by angels. And they go up and they study in yeshiva and then they come back down. Except for the chariot of Rabbi Chiya, it goes up and down by itself. Maybe this is midah keneged midah, just like Rabbi Chiya did everything himself. He even grew the flax to get the nets, to get the deer, and so on, to teach the students. And so, his such a powerful level, he goes up and down without the aid of angels. La mesai leukmal la nafshai istakali ba. But this stage, even though he saw, and he says, I was not able to restrain myself. I had to look at Rabbi Chiya's chariot, even though Eliyahu told me not to look at that one. I couldn't help myself. Atu tere butite denura machyuhu lahu gabra v'saminhu le'aineh. And then 2 fiery flames came out and struck him, that man, meaning him, he's talking about himself. They struck me and they blinded my eyes. Limchad azali v'ishtathi ame'arte amina matniata demor matnina v'itasai. And so the next day, I went to the burial cave of Rabbi Chiya and I prostrated myself and I apologized. I shouldn't have done that. And I said, I study the teachings of the master, the Baraita, the Tosefta, that's attributed to Rabbi Chiya. Study your teachings. And so, right, please forgive me. Allow me to be healed. And sure enough, he was healed. Eliyahu hava shechiach be'metibta derbi. Another story about Eliyahu. Eliyahu would come and hang out in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. What's Eliyahu doing all day after he goes to all the Brit Milahs and so on? So he sits and studies Torah in Rabbi's yeshiva. Yom Achad Resh Yarchahava Negah Le Velata. One day it was Rosh Chodesh and Eliyahu was late and he didn't come to the shiur. Amar Le Ma'itama Negah Le Lemor. So Rabbi next day he says, the old Nabi says, well, what happened? How come you didn't come? I marked you absent. Where were you for the class? Male adeokimna leAbraham mashina yadeh masale umangina le v'chen Yitzchak v'chen Yaakov. So he says, I was busy because it was Rosh Chodesh. I had to wake up Abraham Avinu, wash his hands. I had to wait for him to pray, and then I had to lay him down. I'd do the same thing with Yitzchak and the same thing with Yaakov. Because it was Rosh Chodesh, so they have to say Yalev Yabo and Hatzi Halel and Musaf. Each one takes a long time. And so it took me a lot of the day, and I couldn't come on time to the yeshiva. So Rabbi Esem v'lok minhu behadeh. Why don't you get them all up together? Wake them all up at the same time. They'll all pray at the same time, and that way you could save time instead of doing one after the other. Sabreh takfeh berachameh umayti le lemashiach belazimneh. Eliyahu says, if I do that, their prayers will be so powerful they will bring Mashiach, but it'll be premature. We're not ready for Mashiach, and so I wake them up to pray only one at a time. Amar Lev, yesh dugmatan ba'olam hazeh. Yehuda says, anybody on that level that they can pray so powerfully and bring Mashiach? Anybody like that in this world alive? Amar le'ika, Rabbi Chiya banav. So it's another story about Rabbi Chiya. Yes, Rabbi Chiya and his children, they are on such a level. Gazad Rabbi Tanita. So now Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he got an idea, he got a secret. So he declared a public fast on the community. Achtinhu l'Rabbi Chia ubanav, and he invited Rabbi Chia and his sons to be the chazanim. Right? He had them go down. They would go down to where the chazan was. Amar Mashi Baruch v'nashba zika, and because he was there, and they were all praying together at the same time with the Sibur who was fasting. So when he sang the Amidah and he got to Mashi Baruch, immediately the wind picked up. Amar Morid al Geshem v'atamitra. When he said the words Morid al Geshem, started raining. And he was about to say, Hashem revives the dead, and all of a sudden the world started trembling. Now Tchiat HaMetim is about to happen. So up in heaven they see what's going on. It says, who revealed the secret to the world that Rabbi Chia and his sons, if you have them lead the prayer, then that's it, right? Who gave them the secret? Amri, Eliyahu Navi, he's the one. The angels up in heaven, they tattletailed on Eliyahu. And so the heavenly court brought Eliyahu, and they gave him 60 fiery lashes. Amazing, punishing Eliyahu for revealing too much. Ata idmi lehu kedubad nura al benaihu utradinhu. And so Eliyahu had to stop them right away before they say the words mechayem etim and bring the resurrection of the dead. And so Eliyahu came disguised as a bear made out of fire, and he distracted them. Everybody ran away, and Rabbi Chia was prevented from saying Mechayeh HaMetim. If he were not prevented, then his prayer, Rabbi Chia's prayer, was so great that it would have actually happened. All right, so we see a series of stories about Rabbi Chia's greatness, as well as a number of other stories of the great Torah and the great suffering and the great deeds of many of the Chachamim. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.